Hi, my name's Jessica, and we are going to do some Pilates today. But before we start, I want to go over a few things that I think would be helpful for you. I like to talk a lot about your pelvis and your spine. And in Pilates, I believe that everything starts from this center, this pelvis, your pelvic floor, your pelvis like a bowl, connected to your spine is the control center for all the things that are your body. Your fingers, your toes, your head, your arms, your legs, all that stuff's all connected to this nervous system, this powerhouse, as we used to call it in Pilates. So I'm going to be talking to you a lot about your pelvis. And rather than using a lot of technical words, I like to use what I refer to as the pelvic clock. Now, I didn't make the pelvic clock up. Someone made it up for me, and I really love it, so I use it. So before we get started, this is just in your introduction to the pelvic clock. I want you to imagine that right in front of your body, imagine there's this clock sitting right on top of your pelvis, and your belly button is your number 12. Your left hip is your number 3. Your pubic bone is number 6. And your right hip is number 9. Okay, so you got this clock, it's facing out. Now, really, the only numbers that get interchanged are the 3 and the 9. So you can think of your clock as facing you if it helps you, but I'll probably be referring to it facing out because that's just the way I like to refer to it. So don't worry about those. Those numbers are kind of interchangeable unless we're really working on one side or the other. So anyway, so let's get started thinking about moving your pelvis and imagining that clock sitting on top of your body. Okay, so I want you just to go ahead and lie down onto your mat and just have your feet planted comfortably on the floor. And we're going to be thinking about, here's our clock. Just go ahead and touch your 12, your 3, your 6, and your 9. And think about, as you lay there, which parts of your spine are touching the mat as you just naturally lay here and which parts aren't. So as I'm naturally laying here, I feel my tailbone on the mat, and I feel center back of my pelvis on the mat. And center back of my pelvis is from my tailbone all the way up to, let's say, the top of my butt crack. I know that's not a very PC way to refer to it, but you all know what butt cracks are. So all the way up to the top of my butt crack is center back of my pelvis. I feel that on the mat. Now, as I lay here and I go up, I don't feel the back, the lowest part of my spine, my lumbar spine. I don't feel that naturally touching the mat. I feel that just kind of, it's got a curve. It's got a natural curve. And I don't want to force that into any position, okay? I want to keep those natural curves. I feel my last 3 ribs are not completely on the mat. And then I come up a little higher and I feel my ribs that are connected to my shoulder blades. Those are on the mat, and my shoulder blades are on the mat, and my shoulders are laying flat on the mat as my arms lay flat on the mat. Okay? So now that I've kind of just felt where everything is, we want to think about your spine for a second. I want you to imagine that when you're slouching, this is kind of how things are when you're slouching, but when you're sitting up, we're lifting your spine and we're sitting up tall, okay? So I want you to imagine that there's these very small bones that connect to your sacrum, the very lowest part of your spine, those vertebrae here, and they're really close together. There's your sacrum that's pretty fused, and then there's these lumbar spine that are pretty close together, and as you go up the spine, they create a little bit more space and a little bit more space, and then they're kind of evenly spaced all the way up. I want you to think about those very lowest lumbar vertebrae and imagine they're stacked on top of each other, but that you could lift one up off the other. And then you could lift the next up off the next, and the next up off the next, all the way up through the crown of your head and growing taller through the crown of your head. So when I do that, when I'm slouching here, I lift that lowest vertebrae, and I lift it up from here, and then I lift it up from here, and then I let that lift continue, each bone lifting up off the other until I'm tall. So we're going to do that on the mat, okay? So thinking about laying down, and even here, so I could just kind of rest here, but if I think about lifting my spine all the way from my lowest backbones, all the way up through my ribs and out through the crown of my head, that changes things a little bit. You start to feel something going on in your back, okay? And that's important. We want to keep going back to that, okay? So if you have any questions about that, you can definitely reach out to me and we can talk further about it. But for right now, let's go back to our pelvic clock. Thinking about keep lifting those lowest back bones and growing taller through the crown of your head, we're going to think about imagining there's a little ball or a little pinball or something in between, or right in the middle of your clock, okay? So right in the middle of your clock, we're going to let that ball roll from your 12 to your 6 and your 6 to your 12. So that involves rotating your pelvis back and forth. So as I rotate 6 to 12, the back of my hips go into the mat and my cheeks are a little lighter up off the floor. My tailbone is not on the floor. As I go 12 to 6, I'm creating a little bit more space here. Not a big arch, just a little bit more space, and my tailbone's real heavy. So I'm just gently rolling that ball from 12 to 6 and 6 to 12. And I'm also still thinking about lifting my low back bones as I do this, growing taller through the crown of my head, lengthening my neck. And as I do this, I'm trying not to make a big arch on my 12 to 6, and I'm not trying to smash my back into the mat on the 6 to 12. I'm just making the movement just about my pelvis. So you want to really isolate just your pelvis. Find those muscles that work just to move the pelvis, not to crush your spine into the mat or create a big arch. This takes a little bit of practice, but thinking totally the whole time about lifting your low back bones makes it a little easier. I used to say, imagine that you have like a little raspberry underneath your lumbar spine and that you don't want to crush that raspberry and make jam. So you can think about that too. There's a little raspberry underneath your spine. Open up your chest, make your neck long and straight with your spine, and keep moving 12 to 6 and 6 to 12. Now we've done this a couple of times. Let's try to find neutral again. Neutral being tailbone into the mat, center back of the pelvis on the mat, and then everything else long and lifted, okay? So now let's talk about 3 and 9. 3 and 9, I want you to imagine we're just going to roll that ball over to 3, and then I'm going to gently roll it back over to 9. So we're just gently rolling the ball. We're not making any big, wild movements. Shoulders don't move. Legs are not moving a lot. We're just kind of gently rolling to one side, gently rolling to the other side. So there's that little ball, and we don't want it to rush there. We want it to just kind of gently roll. Imagine that it's like a bowl, and we're pouring oatmeal from one side into the other, and then we're pouring it back into the other side. So just think of something thick and creamy, pouring it into one side and then pouring it to the other side. Your legs can move a little bit, but we really just want to lift your spine, keep your chest open, shoulders on the mat, your neck long and straight with your spine, and just that movement of your pelvis moving. So notice my legs are moving a little bit, but that's because it's kind of challenging to find that movement without moving the legs. So the more you practice, the better you get. And hopefully you're not doing this to get to that movement, okay? So find neutral again. Okay, reset, find neutral, lifted spine. And then now let's find clockwise, counterclockwise. So we're going to think 3 to 12, squeeze the obliques. 9 to 12, squeeze the obliques. Now keep lifting your low back bones and growing taller through the crown of your head so that your shoulders don't go side to side. as you're moving your torso, as you're moving your pelvis. Okay, so we just want it to be the pelvis. Reach your arms long, squeeze your obliques as you go from side to side, and keep thinking about the length in your torso as you are going from side to side. So I like to imagine it's like a lazy Susan. It's flat. We still feel center back of your pelvis on the mat, but we're just moving like a lazy Susan, twisting to one side, twisting to the other side. I don't know what would be on your lazy Susan. I don't really know. I've never had a lazy Susan before. I just use it as a reference because I've seen them before. I don't know what you use them for, really, honestly. But as you go from side to side, squeeze those obliques and squeeze and keep lifting your low back bones. Now, find neutral, relax. While you're doing these movements, you're going to notice that there are a lot of things happening in your spine. You may notice there's a little bit of tightness in certain parts of your back. You may notice that your abs feel a little warm. This lowest part of your abdominals feels warm. That's all good stuff, okay? Because we're kind of walking around imbalanced by the things that we do all day, every day, sitting in our car, driving, carrying our babies, cleaning our houses, watching TV, the way we sleep. All these things put us out of balance. So um, what we're doing in these pelvic movements is kind of readjusting your pelvis, kind of waking up those pelvic floor muscles and those muscles that surround your spine by thinking about lifting them. So you may feel tightness or pain while you're doing those things. And the more you do them, if you start out each one of your Pilates workouts with this, you'll notice that that pain starts to be less and less. The body starts to work in a more even fashion, and you have less of those imbalances if you're doing this on a regular basis. Okay, so one more thing before we go. I want to leave you with your 3 and your 9. Super important for Pilates. I'm sure you've probably heard people tell you to pull your belly button in, or navel to spine, or suck in those abs, or tighten those abs. Um, but I don't want you to think about that in my class. I want you to think about that 3 and that 9. We're going to get lower and deeper than just belly button to spine. We're not thinking about just the abs. We're thinking about the lowest part of your abdominals. Now, I'll still say pull your belly in because that's part of it, but I also want you to get lower. I want you to find your pelvic floor, okay? So let's go back here, and while we're in our neutral pelvis, I want you to think about, you can even touch your 3 and your 9, and I want you to imagine that they have like rubber bands or something attached to them, and that you could pull those two bones towards each other and in. So they would go into each other and down towards the back of your pelvis. So imagine pulling them towards each other. That's not something you're going to see me doing. That's not something that you're going to physically see happen. But when you find it, you're going to feel it and you're going to know it. So think about lifting your low back bones, pulling 3 and 9 towards each other without changing the position of your pelvis. We want to maintain that neutral pelvis and that long lifted spine. And now hold it here and just breathe. Take a deep inhale in through your nose. Long exhale out from your mouth, and it's going to be really challenging to think about pulling those two bones and those muscles in towards each other and continuing to breathe. So layer all those things together. Watch this video as many times as you need to, and I'll be referring to your 3, your 9, your 6, your 12 throughout all of our workouts. And if you have any questions, again, let me know. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. And let's get after it. Aloha.